Welcome along everybody. Now today I'm going to be showing you how I made this card. Obviously it's not a card, it's a print of the card. The original's with Wendy. So to make this card I used the Woodland retreat set. You can see I've blown them up here so you can see it clearer. I've used this little hedgehog here, the deer, and if you look closer you'll see the little frog. And on Wendy's set she normally does a right hand and a left hand frog, so just be careful when you mount them on the stamp. Obviously it will be the other way around to the way you want it. And I'm using the texture set, which I use all the time, and the large grass stamp and the smaller grass stamp here. And the out in the field set, this is one of the new sets. I'm using this tree set here, and I'm going to be using that for background foliage. Okay, so we'll get started. As you can see, I've taped down my card. These top and bottom is to make a border, which those of you who follow me know that I like to do that. You don't have to do that. You can make the whole card the picture. It's entirely up to you. And I've just put another line of tape across here because that's where I'm going to put my horizon line for the sky. So I'm just going to put this there to stop it getting on the rest of the card. So I'm going to start off with doing the horizon line. I'm just going to put my original in front of me just so I can get the right colours. And I'm going to start off using Versacolor heliotrope, which is a lovely sort of, I'll just get one that's open, a lovely mauve colour. Now I'm using a mix of Versacolor and Versafine clair for this card. If you don't have these inks, then any sort of blendable inks around these colours will be fine. You don't have to stick to the ones I use. But I think sometimes the Versafine clair is better for stamping. You can blend with it, but it's a permanent ink. So once it's on, it won't blend again. Do you see what I mean? Whereas Versacolor, you can go in and blend with it with the other colours. Okay, so I'm just taking a little bit onto my dry baby wipe there, and I'm just going to rub a little bit off on here, and then we're going to start running it along the horizon line. Now you don't have to be too precise about this because we're going to merge the colours in with each other. So, and we want quite a nice sort of definite line where the tape is. So we've got a definition of where the horizon ends. Okay, so we're just going to swirl this up, and then I'm going to put just a little bit more along the bottom and take it up into the sides like that. Okay, put the lid back on that so it doesn't dry out. And then I'm going to take a colour called Seashell, which is also Versacolor. And again, it doesn't matter if you haven't got exactly this colour, any of this sort of corally, sort of pinky colour, salmony pink will do. And then what I'm going to do is just start from halfway up the purple and blend it through like this. And it's always best, I think, to sort of just build up your colours a little bit at a time. So you might not be able to see that now, but if you put very dark colour on to start with, it's harder to blend it out. So I always say to people who are new to crafting, just little bits at a time. You can always add more on if it's not strong enough, it's not exactly what you want. And don't forget, every picture you do is going to be slightly different. So although I'm trying to replicate this card for you, it's not going to be exactly the same as the original, and I'm not really worried about that. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of the Versacolor Narcissus. You can see this is a bit contaminated. I'm a bit messy with my inks, I'm afraid. But I'm going to take the cleaner part here. And this is a sort of pale yellow colour. And then that's just going to blend in with that seashell colour, just to give a hint of sunlight behind the clouds. You see it's a slightly different colour, not too much, just above there. That's right, like that. And then finally I'm going in with my blue, baby blue, and I'm just going to take a little bit onto my baby wipe I'm going to run it off first because I want this to be really sort of pale. Now, if you're going to tape your card like I've done to make a border, the one thing I would remind you to do is try and create a line across the top, because I usually draw a little black line either end where the tape's been. You don't have to do that, but either way, if you don't sort of make a definitive line, you won't be able to see it when you come to do that. If you're not bothering with the line, you just want it to sort of look more, I don't know, you don't want the line there. It doesn't really matter. So we're just going to add a little bit more blue down here. Now, I hope you can see that on the camera. Sometimes the camera doesn't pick up the more subtle colours, so I'm just going to add a little bit more, probably more than I would do normally, just so you can see it on the camera. Okay, and then once you've got all three colours in place, just take a clean part of your baby wipe and then just very, very gently blend right across the middle, so you're getting rid of any sort of harsh lines, so that they all blend in together like that. Okay, so I'll take that away, and now I'm going to remove my tape, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the island part of the card, which is here. You can see that. So to do this, I'm going to use a little bit of cut paper. Now, I'm using a straight edge for this because you can always make it a little bit, add a little bit of detail on it, but the water's edge would look straight. So I'm using a straight edge for this. Also, we want to make sure we're going to leave enough space for the animals. So you have to sort of work out where you want it. And I think it's sort of halfway up around here. We're going to have it. Okay, like that. In fact, that's not the straight edge, I don't think. Let's find the straight edge, which is that one. Neither of those. Let's go back and use this line. It doesn't really matter. So we'll put that there. Like that. And then what I'm going to do, I'm using a slightly different colour for this. I'm going to be using, to start with, I'm going to go with Versafine pinecone, because I want a sort of definitive line and work out where I want the island. So I want it to come out to about here on my card. So I'm just going to go along this line until I'm happy. Now, as you get to the end where you want it to tail out, just rub it very gently so it does naturally tail out. So you can see here I'm building it up, and then at the end I'm just tailing it out like that. And then I'm going to take some more Versafine pinecone and just rub it off on here, and then create the look of foliage. First of all with the pinecone colour, like that. Just do it random shapes with your finger like that. If you're using a blending tool, you can do exactly the same. You just push it at an angle so you get these different types of shapes. And now I'm going to go in with a slightly different colour. I'm going to use the Versacolor cinnamon at the back, because the reason I'm doing this is because I want it to look like the back of the bushes is being caught by the light coming from the back of the picture. So we're just going to run that along there. Again, if you haven't got this cinnamon, any sort of lighter colour will do. In the pink range, I always think that the pink colour scheme goes well with brown. So if the sun was shining on brown, making it lighter, it would be more a pinky hue. Okay, so we've got that. Now you can see the two contrasts. Now I've got the background in, I'm going to add a little bit more variation. So I'm using this colour called Cocoa. Now you just have fun with this, all right? You must have different colours in your stash to me. So just try it out and see. As long as they're all in the same colour palette, it doesn't really matter. You can use whatever you want. And that's part of the fun of crafting, and that's part of the fun of getting your own style, is the different way you use colours. Okay, so I think I'm happy with the background there. I'm going to just put in my pine cone again, just to accentuate the start of the island, and it would be a little bit darker nearer where the water was. So just go back down that line and tail it out again like I did before. And then also I'm going to use a little bit of paper where you can see I've cut little inclines on it, and I'm just going to run that just very gently to give the impression that there are little mounds there within that foliage. You see, you see that? You'll see it more when I take the garden paper away. I'll show you in a minute. And then we're just going to add another one there. There, you can just see that there, and you can see another couple there. That just gives, it's not all one level then. Okay, I'm going to put that back there, because now what I want to do is I want to stamp. Let's put my baby, I'm just going to wipe my finger. I'm going to stamp the tree on the background here. Now, I do a lot of my foliage like this with these little stamps. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use this bottom part. I'm only going to use really the branches and up to there. So the best way to do this, if you're new to crafting and you're a bit nervous about doing that, then what I suggest you do is just stamp. Let me think. I'm going to use Versacolor Cocoa, right? So stamp the whole thing, give it a good coating, and then take either a wet baby wipe, or I use one of these microfiber cloths, and then just wipe it away what you don't want. It doesn't really matter, because, you know, if you leave it a little bit on, because we're going to stamp it as foliage anyway, so we can cover it up. And then what you do, we'll put that guard back in place. I'm going to put this little bit of paper here, and then we're going to stamp there like that, and then just press gently, and then you see you get the idea of the branches and the trees coming out. Okay, so I'm just going to try that one more time. Now, the other way to do it, you can stamp the whole thing and then use your paper as a guard, so you have the stamp coming below the paper. And this time I'm going to have it slightly angled and press a little bit harder so I get a bit more of that detail in. Now, you can see it's a nice impression. And then what I would do is put my guard back, and then I'm going to go back in with the baby wipe, and I'm using the pine cone, the darker colour, just to blend around the bottom there of those two trees, and at the back like that. Can you see? So you can't actually see the stalk part anyway. And then we're going to add some more of these shapes in. So where that's there, I'm going to add a little bit of a curve there, and I'm going to do it the other way, so an incline on this one there. And then when you finish doing that, then you can go back to the background, because, you know, obviously when you put the background, you want to do the stamping. When you put the background in, you might want to just extend that a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just go up a little bit here. I'm going to blend a little bit of that colour in with the trees, just to make it look like there's foliage behind it, and then go down here a little bit more like that. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is just take a little bit of the paper and make a little bit of an incline at the back there, just to give a contrast in the colour like that. And this is quite an effective way. Most of my background foliage is done with using utilising winter stamps like that. So the branches of the trees, you know, you can just do a green, do a green sort of blend on your paper, and then just stamp the branches of the trees, cut out all the rest of it, and then stamp that to look like the foliage on the bushes. So they're very versatile. Now, I think that's enough for the purpose of this demonstration. You could make that a lot more, you know, you could go on and make that more complicated as you want. I'm not going to do that because really the picture is based on the foreground, and that's what we're going to come to now. So I'm going to use this piece of paper that I used before, and I'm going to create a sort of graduated wave here for the animals to stand on. So I'm going to turn it this way up. I think that's probably enough. And then again, I'm going to use my Versacolor pine cone. And then I'm just going to go along here. If you're nervous about this paper moving, just tape it down. I'm not really bothered, because if it does smudge, you can just cover over it with, when we put the textured grass on from the texture stamp set, it will cover up a lot of the smudges, so don't worry about that. Really, what you're doing is getting yourself an outline as a guide. Okay, so we're just going to go in now a bit darker. Now we've got that line. I want that quite dark, and again, it will probably be darker at the front where this tape runs along the bottom, like that. So I'm just going to run a little bit down there. Now, if I lift that up, you can see now there's shape there. Also, I'm going to, before I put my grass in, you'll notice in the original that the frog is standing on a little bit of a mound shape. So what I'm going to do is, I've just cut a little V out, and this is quite a triangular shape, but that doesn't really matter because I'm just going to use that as a guide, and then I'm going to expand on it. So I think we're going to put the frog about here. So then I just colour that in, just to give me an idea where it is, like that. And then freehand, I'm just going to make that into a little hill that our frog is going to be sitting on. Now, the reason I'm doing this, when I made the original, I originally was going to put the frog in the grass, and when I went to stamp him, the stamp itself is very, very detailed, and you can actually see the frog because he was sort of buried in the grass. So what I decided to do was build a mound and then sit him on top of the mound, so he's very clear. And there's just a little tip I'm going to give you about that as well with this particular card in a minute. So you can see what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is going to have a texture stamp on it in a minute. So just create that little hill for him to sit on, and that, I think that's enough. And then I'm just going to go back and create. I've said to you before, sometimes when you use these baby wipes, you get a nice natural texture. I don't know if you can see that, but when you're doing this type of work, it's quite nice to get that. Okay, so I'm just going to build that up above there. And there. And then going into this side. Okay. Now we're going to put the water in. Now, the reason I'm doing it that way round is because we need to know where we're having our hedgehog's going to go here, our frog's going to go here, and our deer's going to be standing here. So when we colour the water, we need to make sure that we leave those areas quite pale, because although we're going to use Versafine clair and it will stamp over other colours, we don't want it competing with a really dark colour. So what I'm going to do is go back to my colours that I used for the sky, and I'm going to go with the blue first, the pale blue, baby blue, and I'm just going to run it very lightly across the back under my horizon line. Now, you don't want a harsh line here because you've already got your horizon line, so if you put another harsh line in underneath it, it will confuse the eye a bit. So just gently run that colour along the back, until, again, I'm going to put on a little bit more than I normally would do because I want you to be able to see it. And then when you've done that, then we go to the hyacinth. And you don't even really need to change. You can, I know it contaminates the ink, but if you wipe them afterwards, then use your narcissus then to carry on. So really all we're doing is mimicking the colours of the sky into the water. And then we'll bring that colour around here, like that. And then I'm going to put a little bit of the heliotrope in as well, where that, I'm just going to rub that off because the heliotrope is quite a strong colour, so I don't want a big blob of mauve. So we just bring that down into that colour as well, like that. Now, when you get to where the little island is, then you need to go back to your colours you used in the island, because obviously the reflection in the water will be these colours. So first of all, I'm going to use the pinecone, but this time I'm going to rub it off because I don't want it to be very dark. And again, we don't want to create a really strong line because we've already got our strong line where the island is. And then what you do is mimic the shape. So you do it in the same sort of shape as you've actually created it. So once you've done the darker colour, and I'm just going to add a little bit of the darker colour along the water's edge there. Then we put in our lighter colour, which was the cinnamon. And I think I've got a little bit of that on my cloth still, so I'm just going to use that. If you are using these inks and you get a mark like that, don't worry, because we're going to put some little white lines across it to mimic the water anyway. So don't worry too much about that. And then also what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my tree stamp again. I'm going to put the cocoa on it, but then I'm going to stamp it off onto a scrap piece of paper. Put your liner paper there, and it's going to go about there because the tree's not right at the water's edge. And then we're just going to quickly do an impression like that, and then we're going to do another one like that. So it looks like they're reflecting the water, and you just want those to be very pale. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Don't, try and, if you're doing a definite reflection, you would reverse it and everything, but you don't need to do that with this. It's just really to mimic what's at the water's edge. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more of the pine cone along the bottom there in a more textured way, just so. Right. And I think that will do, because I say that's not really the main focus of this picture. I am going to add a little bit more yellow, a bit of the narcissus into this bit here, because it just looks white at the moment. I do want a little bit of colour in it, so we'll just add that. And I'm going to add a little bit of the heliotrope at the back of the picture where the blue starts. So if you don't use the same colours as me, whatever colours you're using, use the same colours to go into the water. And then we just bring that round there like that. Now I might add a bit more to the water once I've stamped the animals, but obviously I now want to put those in. So first of all, we're going to have our deer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a piece of paper so you can see me stamp. So this is quite a big deer, and I'm going to use a Versafine Clair Acorn, this is called. it's quite, you can see it's quite a sort of, I would say almost a gingery sort of brown. So what I'm going to do is just temper it a little bit with the pine cone. Just temper it down a little bit like that. And then the other thing I'm going to do, I've just got to, I'm going to take my Versafine Clair Nocturne, which is the black, and just dab it around the edges, around the hoofs and around the back. And then go back over it with the Versafine, with the Versacolor, just to tone that down a little bit, because otherwise it would be too dark. And what I will probably do once I've stamped this is go back in and add a bit of colour, depending on how the deer comes out. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our deer here. And the other thing I meant to say to you is I don't really want his feet showing because we're going to have grass. So we're going to just lose his hooves a little bit there. And we're going to stamp him. Now, he pressed quite hard. And I've said this to you in other videos, if you just let the ink absorb into the paper just for a minute with these, this is a slightly bigger stamp obviously, and there we've got a nice impression. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is the frog, and for this one I'm using Versafine Clair Shady Lane. Now the good thing about Versafine Clair is once it dries you can shade around it and it won't move, which is why these are good for stamping your main characters. Now, what I suggest you do with the frog, because it's obviously it's sitting in a certain way, ink it up and then stamp it so you know it will be sitting exactly how you want it when you stamp it. So I'm just going to obviously ink that up again. And then we're going to sit the frog on our little mound, which is there. So again, now with the smaller stamps, put your finger on and just hold it, and just you can gently rock it backwards and forwards. Don't push really hard, because what happens with the smaller stamps, you can sometimes lose that finer detail. So you're better off just gently tapping it and letting the ink go into the paper. And there you can see all the little, I hope you can see that on the camera, all the little details of the frog. And then lastly, our hedgehog, who I'm going to stamp in the Versafine pinecone. Now this is quite a dark colour, so what I will probably do is go back and just add a little bit of lighter colour to the hedgehog. I'll show you that afterwards. So we're going to have him standing about here. So again, just gently, because he's got some very, very fine detail on the spines. So just hold your finger there, just gently rock it, and give it a minute to just absorb into your paper. And there, you've got a lovely impression. Okay, now it all looks a bit odd because we haven't put the grass in. But before I do that, I'm just going to, add a little bit of colour to my deer. So obviously, when you have a stamped image like that, it's difficult to go in with something like a baby wipe. So what I like to do is use these chalk pencils. I use Stabilo, but you know, any sort of chalk pencil or colouring pencil if you want to. And then what I do is just gently, where I want the areas to be a little bit darker, try and take your time doing this. Obviously I'm rushing, I'm not doing a very good job of it. So take your time. We're just going to give him a little bit of dark colour hair. Now, because they're chalk pencils, what you can then do is take a clean part of your baby wipe and then just blend them in so you haven't got any harsh lines. And I wouldn't worry too much about this. It's just it just defines, it makes the animal look more natural. And if you really, you know, you really like this part, you like colouring, you like this sort of thing, get a picture and go to town, you know, colour it in exactly. We've got some really good colourists on the group who do a wonderful job of this. So this is just for demonstration purposes. I'm just giving you an idea of how I do it. So I think that's probably enough. I'm just going to blend that more sort of rust colour in. And animals are very rarely one colour, are they? When you look at their fur, their layers of fur are all different. The other thing I like to do is I like to give my animals a little eye, which I'm going to do at the end because I use one of these gel pens, and once you've used it, you don't want to smudge it over everything else. Okay, so the frog, it speaks for himself, but now we move on to the hedgehog. So the hedgehog, I just want to give him a bit of a lighter body, so I'm going to use this really light colour. I'm going to add it in here. And then I'm just going to get a clean part of my baby wipe and just blend that in. And then you might need to do this multiple times. Just to give a little bit of a contrast. Again, I haven't really got time to take too long over this, but you get the sort of idea. And then again, I'm going to use this more gingery colour on his back, just to bring out those. Now, this is what I mean when you're adding things to a stamp. This has got lots and lots of detail of his spines. So you can see what I'm doing with the pencil. I'm just dotting it like that. And then I'm very carefully just going to dab over it. And I think for the purpose of this video, that you get the idea of what I'm doing. But please take your time. If I had more time, I'd probably make that a little bit more lighter. And sometimes you can even, you see my painting technique, if you squash a bit of your colour onto the mat and use a very fine paintbrush, you can paint that. But I haven't got time to do that today. But, you know, these are all techniques I've shown you in my other videos. So please, you know, you go with whichever one makes you feel more comfortable. Okay, so now we're going to get onto the grass bit, the stamping of the grass. Now, I'm going to go with the tall grass first, which is this stamp out of the texture set. I have to say, if you're new to Cardio and you're asking which stamp set you should buy, I use this one every time I make a card, almost every time. So I would definitely recommend the texture set. And there's an untamed texture set now as well, which is also really good. So that's my little tip. Okay, I'm using Versafine pinecone for this. So you ink up and then just put your I mean, we've got the tape across there, so you don't really need the paper, but then we're going to go random with the big one. Now, it looks a bit mad at first because they're very big, but this is the foreground, don't forget. So, and then very carefully stamp around your animals. We don't want any of the animals. The feet can be covered up, which is what I said to you earlier. So we don't mind if the deer's feet's covered up a little bit. And secondary and third stamp, because then you get the different shades sort of naturally without having to work too hard at it. And I'm just going to put that there. And then we're going to come into this side where we can use more of the stamp, the bigger side like that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is take the smaller grass stamp and do exactly the same. Only this time I'm going to go in and out of the, so bit there, bit at the back. Can you see what I'm doing? So one, and then just take it up using the secondary and third ink around the hooves. Like that, onto the grass mound, and then rock it on where the tape is so you get it right up to the tape, and then being very careful not to actually obscure the frog. It doesn't matter if we lose the bottom half of the hedgehog a little bit, because we want him to look sort of in a natural setting. Now you can see I've made a mistake there, but I'll show you how to rectify that in a minute. Don't rock your stamp forward like I just did with ink on it. I'll just wipe that off so it doesn't happen again. And I'll show you how to rectify that mistake in a minute. Don't try and wipe it while it's wet. Don't try and do anything with it while it's wet. Just leave it there. There's always, I mean, I make mistakes every time I make a card. I found lots and lots of ways to rectify mistakes. So don't you know, get halfway through a card and think, oh no, I've got to throw it away now because I've done that, because there's always a way around it. Okay, so I'm just going to add this texture at the back because I quite like there to be grass around the deer like this. Okay, and now we're just going to put another bit there. So I think that's probably enough grass, but I'm going to add the slightly lighter colour, just the acorn, just a couple of little stamps of the lighter colour. Now, you won't necessarily see this very much, but I've realised that when I've been, you know, as I've learned to craft, when you add different colours, what you do is then add texture, so it actually looks like the grass is thicker. Okay. Then leave that to dry a little bit, because then I'm going to show you, I'm going to put some lighter colour along the bottom just to give it a little bit more texture, but let that ink, it doesn't take long to dry, but just let it dry. Now what I'm going to do with this here, because this is water in the background, I'm going to take my Signo pen, white pen, and these are rollable. Now we've had lots of comments on these because it's an ink that comes to the rollable tip like that. It's an opaque ink, so it covers up things. But because of this, it's quite thick, and sometimes the tip of your Signo will get clogged up. All you have to do is get a damp cloth or a wet baby wipe, dry the nib, and then just get the ink to come back down like that. If it doesn't work, give it a bit of a shake and then try it again, because what you want to do is free up the rollerball where the ink's gone dry on the actual tip itself. Okay, and then what I'm going to do now, I like to do these as straight lines, so I'm going to use a ruler. You don't have to do this, but I'm freehand. I'm absolutely useless at drawing straight lines. So what I'm going to do is go up to my horizon line at the top there, try and get it as straight as possible, and then I'm just going to put in a sort of unbroken line like that. Now the other thing, keep a piece of paper handy when you're using a Signo. I'm just going to tear off a little bit here, because you probably will have to keep just running it off, because especially at this demonstration my ink's wet, so I will probably have to keep running it off onto there. And then now it's really hard to see this on the camera, but I can see there are little white lines appearing, and it's sort of the idea of this is to mimic the little ripples you get in water. Obviously in water like this, it's very still, they would just be little tiny white lines. When you're doing a sea, then obviously you make them more like waves, which I will get around to making a video and show you that. Okay, so we're just going to put a few more in here, and then I'm going to come down here, make sure my Signo's flowing, and then run it a white line along here. Oh, sorry, just put that in place like that. It's funny when you're concentrating, you sort of forget to talk. And then you can see just those little white, as if water's sort of lapping up against the... And don't forget, although we put shade in here, this is still water, so don't worry about going straight over the trees you stamped, because they're in the water, aren't they? They're a reflection, so that makes it look more realistic. And then we're just going to add a few more, one under the deer, and then we're going to go here. So where I made that awful mistake, I'm actually going to cover it up with my Signo pen. Now this might take a couple of goes because it's quite a dark colour. And what I'll do is I'll leave that to dry for a minute, and then I'll go back over it when it's dry with a little bit of the colours I've used, and hopefully that should get rid of it altogether. There's a little bit there as well. So that will give me a base just to add some more Versacolor to. Okay, and then the other thing I'm going to do while I've got the Signo pen is just add a little bit of texture into these blades of grass like this, so they're not all too dark. Now when you've done that, I always like to, because they're a bit harsh, just blend it through a little bit. Like that. Now, as always, you know, do give your ink a little bit of time to dry. It's so much easier to use these pens over dry ink. Okay. Now I'm going to add in the contours again into my, where my animals are, and I'm going to just cut. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting sort of some wavy lines on a bit of paper. I'm going to use the larger bit so I don't have to. And then we're going to have that about there. And I'm going to use quite a light colour for this. I'm just seeing what I've got. Bisque. Again, it's that in that pinky sort of brown. You try and keep the colours you're using in the same sort of family, and then we're just going to run that down there. And then through that mound there. And then we're going to put some underneath the hedgehog here. Like that. And then just blend that in a little bit. Now it looks a bit odd at the moment, I know. But then what I'm going to do is go underneath it with the pine cone again. So just slightly underneath where you've done that lighter line, go underneath with the pine cone. Like that. There. And then you can have a look at the grass. I'm going to add a little bit more of the taller grass in the background there, because I think we can give it a little bit more height than, you know, it's better to, like I say, don't do it first of all, just wait and see how your picture's getting on, like that. And then I'm going to do the same this side. So what I want to do is I want it the tall grass there, so I'm just going to mask that off there and use my taller grass. And if you keep double stamping it, it doesn't look so odd, it looks more natural. There, can you see? And I'm going to use the smaller grass stamp just to go back under the tortoise. And behind him and in front of him. Back up there. And just in front of where I've done that lighter colouring. A little bit at the back there. There. So I think that's enough grass. I'm just going to clean up my workstation a little bit, because that's how you get smudges on things. So let's just make sure all our equipment's nice and clean. And now I'm coming to the finishing touches. I've just noticed that there is a little bit of a mark there, look, that I've smudged. So I'm just going to go over that. And then what I'm going to do, just add the little white bits into that new grass that I've just stamped. Let's just blend that down. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of colour over where I corrected that mistake. I think we'll probably use the heliotrope, and that's slightly the darker colour, and will hopefully cover better. So just go in and dab that and there. And then blend it down back into the picture. Like that. And then I'm just going to take my ruler again and cover up the little bits you can still see, which is there, there, there. You get the idea. Like that. And there. And there's one there. And then I'm just going to freehand some little lines on the bit I've just reshaded to give it a bit of continuity. Okay, so there's two things left to do now on this picture. The first thing is I'm going to just draw a very fine line. Now I'm using a fineliner for this. It's a, I don't know if you can see that, it's a 005. It's one of the finest you can get, and I'm just accentuating the back of the deer. Now this is completely your choice whether you do this. I'm not going to go around the whole thing. I'm just going to go there. I'm going to go under there, and just one of these legs, a little bit of these legs, and the back leg. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the frog, and then I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to do the nose of the hedgehog, and then I'm just going to add a few spikes coming up from his back there, just where we've had to colour over that. And down that line there. Now that's completely your choice. I say you don't have to do that. And because you can see a little bit of the foot there, I'm going to just ground that hedgehog there and have a bit of grass covering up his foot. And the same there. And the same with the frog, because the frog's sitting on this mound. I just want a little bit of the grass to come up around him so he doesn't look like he's floating in midair. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of white to that. This is what I mean, you see, so just rub that off and then it should be good to go again. Like I say, if you let your ink dry properly, it wouldn't happen as much as that. Okay, and then I'm also going to add a little broken sort of line across our waterline here, freehand. Again, you don't have to do this. It's entirely up to you. And then I'm going to go back underneath it because my white line didn't show very much. I'm going to go back underneath that with a white line just to show where the water might be lapping against that little island. Like that. Okay, and my final touch to this picture is to use one of these gel pens, and I'm just going to run, you can see this is a black one, so I'm just going to run it off so I get a nice lot of ink at the nib, and then I'm going to just put a dot into the deer's eye. And on the tip of his nose, and the hedgehog. Now, this is probably really difficult for the camera to pick up, but what happens with this gel pen is they'll dry slightly raised and quite shiny, which is lovely for this particular picture. Okay, so I'm going to clean my hands off, just tidy up, and then I'll remove the tape. Let me just move all these inks out the way. So carefully remove your tape. Now, like I say, I like to frame the picture because I think it gives a nice natural frame. You don't have to. You can do the whole card, you know, do it all the length of the card. It's entirely up to you. And then the other thing I do, and this is why I do it, because you can see on this card, you get that slightly uneven edge there. So I'm going to use my ruler. Just make sure you can see that. I'm going to put it underneath where the card ends. Hold it tight and then just draw a line all the way along the bottom. And if you find that it hasn't covered up the raggy edge, just go down a bit further and do it again. Or use a slightly thicker black pen. And I think one more. I'm just trying to keep it in position so you can still see it, so it's a bit trickier. And then I'm going to go to the other side, and now you can see what I'm saying about using the colouring on the sky. So you can now see where the sky naturally ends on your picture. And then we're going to put our ruler there. Just bring it down a bit that side, and then draw a line across the top. Well, we'll try that again. That's it. Let's make sure the pen's working. I think for some reason my pen's got caught up with some of the... I'm just going to try a different pen because that's obviously got caught up with some ink on it. So I'm just going to get a fresh one out, make sure the ink's coming to... Yeah, that's better. Okay, I'll just do that again so you can see. Let me put the card back where it was. So we put that there. And then draw your line along there. And I'm just going to tidy up that little raggy bit. That's it. And then we'll go back down to the bottom because the pen obviously wasn't working, the original one. So I'll just do that line again. So now, like I say, you don't have to put these lines in and you don't have to put the tape on. That's your choice. There. Now you can see the difference there. You've got a nice clean line for the image. Okay. So that's the picture. This was the original. It obviously looks much bigger because I've had to print it out. And this is the one I did today. This is more realistic because it's this size. This is the one. And I think the original Wendy's got. So if you are going to any of the shows, you might be able to see it at one of the shows if you want to look at it more close up and get an idea of how it's made. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to welcoming you along the next time. Thank you.